Now, as you've probably heard, two boxers, Imane Khelif and Lin Yu-Ting, were disqualified from the 2023 World Championships after failing to meet International Boxing Association eligibility criteria because they took DNA tests to qualify but were found to have XY chromosomes, despite neither of them identifying as transgender or intersex. Now, there was a lot of hoo-ha over them being allowed to compete at the Olympics, and the IOC essentially said it was okay because their passports said they were female, but it came to a head when Italian boxer Angela Carini pulled out of her fight with Khelif after less than a minute, 46 seconds to be precise. Carini claimed she had never felt a punch like this. She has since apologised following the media storm. Now, the IOC said in a statement that all athletes participating in the boxing tournament of the Olympic Games Paris 2024 comply with the competition's eligibility and entry regulations. The current aggression against these two athletes is based entirely on this arbitrary decision by the IBA in 2023, which was taken without any proper procedure, especially considering that these athletes had been competing in top-level competition for many years. Lucy, you've been very strong on this throughout the week. But, you know, regardless of whether they identify as transgender or intersex or they believe that they're female their whole lives, I don't think it particularly matters. They took genetic testing. The genetic testing showed that they had high levels of testosterone and XY chromosomes. Surely that should be the end of the discussion.
That's the beginning of the discussion and also the end of the discussion. The thing, before we get into what we know about it, and you've already outlined some of the facts around there, the ultimate question for me that we have to address is this first, right? And this applies to everything. When you look at the transgender issue, when you look at difference of sex development athletes, which, by the way, we don't know if this is occurring with these respective athletes in question, the two boxers, is why were sex-segregated categories introduced in the first place? And the answer to that is to protect female competitors from maladvantage. When you dial back your arguments in this to that particular premise, then really that should be able to be your that's the opinion that you should be formulating everything on, based on that. So I think it's been a really tragic show for the International Olympics Committee, who coming into this as well were, starting to instruct journalists on the types of problematic language that they couldn't use. Things like biological male were being bandied around as problematic. Already their credibility has started to erode. If you do believe that women's sports and this sex-segregated category should exist for women, then you should believe that anybody, regardless of their particular biological condition or who they identify as, you do believe that women are entitled to this safety and the integrity that sex-segregated category provides them with. The conversation ends there. And it's been a really difficult week, I think, for the athletes in question as well. I think for everybody involved, including the female participants as well, who feel a particular way about all of this. And don't forget that female competitors have been, crying out about this for many, many years now. This isn't something that just emerged overnight and in the Olympics. It's something that you have to consider has been going on for a number of years, but I'm very glad about the fact that it has been now put in the shopfront window and that we can start having mature conversations around this and why the need to protect female categories are important going forward. So there's a lot here at stake. Unfortunately, the reputation of the IOC, the IBA, I think, have been very brilliant in, consistently coming out and condemning what they've seen. But we need protection for female athletes, and I think this is the perfect opportunity to have that conversation now in a mature way, without constantly throwing slurs around and saying, oh, well, you're a bigot and you're a transphobe and you're a fascist if you disagree with these participations. I'm really tired of that. Let's start being adults now and let's start putting the athletes and their well-being and safety at the forefront of these conversations.
And in lieu of the common sense approach, Freya, which should be that these two people shouldn't be allowed to compete in the first place, what Carini did the other day, and we'll get to her apology in a moment and what all of that meant, but what Carini did the other day created the moment for us to actually have the genuine discussion about this, because it proved the point. We're talking about two competitors here who clearly have a competitive advantage because of their genetic makeup, and as Lucy says, if you have sex-segregated sport, it's there for a reason and it simply comes down to fairness. Surely the IOC and sport more broadly now has to act.
Yes, and I know this is not the case of trans-identifying athletes, but this is something that's happening across women's sport from the grassroots level up. I've spoken to people who have young kids who are sprinting or doing track and field or skiing against trans competitors, and as young girls, there's a big difference between an 8-year-old girl and an 8-year-old biological male. It's just so unfair. And so I think now that it's actually this sort of issue of gender ideology in sport has reached the Olympics, which is the pinnacle of sporting achievement, it's going to empower people from the grassroots level up to actually take a firmer stand in protecting women's sport.
And so it should be. But the apology, Paul, is... And Carini had posted on social media an image that sort of indicated how she felt about the whole thing, which had a rather large, burly-looking figure coming up against her. And now she's saying, oh, you know, if I come up against Khelif again, or I met Khelif again, I'd embrace her and give her a big hug. I mean, this is just
probably
more
safest.
of the... it's more of the same bullying that we've seen through the entirety of this discussion, whether it involves transgender athletes or otherwise. But the gender discussion when it comes to sport, it's that same bullying once again, except against someone who's come up against someone with XY chromosomes.
Correct. A couple of quick things here. I think that the obvious nonsense of even a grey area in a high contact sport like boxing is obviously ridiculous, right? I think, bold prediction, boxing won't be in the Olympic Games for much longer. As a sport, it's had its issues, and plenty of people saying, oh, you know, it isn't a sport, it's basically sort of delayed brain damage, all the rest of it. So I wouldn't be surprised if the sidestep around the complexity that is so obviously on show, that the way to deal with that to some degree is that I think perhaps by Brisbane, we don't know what will happen in America, but by Brisbane it may well just be gone. The second thing is that, and this is when, and you know, I agree with what Freya said, and Lucy, I want to say how fearless you've been on this. Has been awesome to see, right? Listening on the radio, watching on the telly. And that's because you know that when people do a certain job for a living, access starts to affect things, right? So if you're 100% a business journalist, generally speaking, they're not always going to come out with the true dirt on what's going wrong in the business world because they won't call you back. Same with politics, same with sport, and in smaller sports that don't have the same sorts of global media presence as, say, football or even to an extent swimming, the pot gets smaller and smaller. So very obviously, we all saw what we saw with our own eyes, and then magically, the apology comes around. The story is, why did she have the apology, right? What brought that on? We want to know the behind the scenes there, because the likelihood is that this is not somebody who is a millionaire, certainly now at the amateur level. She may well be, of course, in the professional level. But I think that is the story in terms of the overall obvious issue with everyone else. We see what we see.